The FBI has apparently concluded that every single ransom note connected to the Nancy Guthrie case is fake. Every one of them. Not just the TMZ emails, not just the Kalela texts, all of them, including the 2 notes that Savannah Guthrie herself said she tends to believe are real. Including the 2 notes that contain details about the inside of Nancy's home that no stranger could have known. That is what Reuters reported this week, citing 2 law enforcement sources. And if that report is accurate, it does not just change one thread of this investigation. It changes the entire framework everyone has been using to understand what happened to Nancy Guthrie since February. But here is the problem. Brian Entin, who has been covering this case with direct law enforcement sources since day one, says that is not what he is being told. His sources have consistently told him that at least the first 2 notes, the ones sent to local Tucson TV stations containing the Apple Watch detail and the broken porch light, are still being investigated as potentially legitimate, not confirmed real, but not dismissed either, still on the table, still being worked. So who is right? A respected global news agency with 2 law enforcement sources saying all fake, or a boots-on-the-ground investigative journalist with his own sources saying still potentially real? And more importantly, how can 2 completely opposite conclusions exist simultaneously inside the same active federal investigation? That question has an answer, and it tells you something deeply uncomfortable about the state of this investigation right now. Before we get into all of it, if you are just finding this channel and you have been following this case, subscribe right now, because every time something breaks in this investigation, it lands here first, and you do not want to be catching up. Now here is what Entin pointed out that makes the Reuters report difficult to accept at face value. If there is no named suspect, if investigators have not yet identified who sent those first 2 notes, then how can anyone inside the FBI say with certainty that they are fake? Authenticating a ransom note as real requires connecting it to a suspect. Declaring it fake with the same certainty requires the same thing. Without a suspect, you cannot say definitively either way. You can have a working theory, you can have doubts, but a definitive conclusion requires evidence that links the note to a specific person, and right now that person has not been publicly identified. That logical gap is why Entin was skeptical of the Reuters report from the moment it dropped. Not because Reuters is not credible, they are, but because the conclusion they were handed by their sources requires a certainty the investigation does not yet have. And then within 24 hours, the FBI did something they have not done in months. They issued an official public statement. Not a leak, not an anonymous source. An official statement from FBI Phoenix saying some ransom demands may potentially be legitimate and are still being investigated as such. And that this case continues to be investigated as a kidnapping for ransom case. The FBI does not break months of public silence to issue a formal statement correcting a news report unless something significant forced their hand. That statement was a direct contradiction of the Reuters report, and it came from the field office in Phoenix, the people actually working the case, not from headquarters in Washington, D.C., where the Reuters sources appear to have been located. 2 different parts of the same federal agency, 2 completely opposite readings of the same evidence. One leaked to a global news agency, the other forcing an official public response that has not been seen since the opening press conferences of this investigation. That internal fracture matters for reasons that go well beyond this week's news cycle, because it suggests the people closest to this case and the people managing it from a distance are not operating from the same understanding of what the evidence actually shows. And that gap in a case with no arrest after 5 months is not a minor administrative issue. It is a problem. The Reuters report is not even the most significant development buried inside this week's coverage. Because while the debate about real versus fake was consuming the headlines, something else came out that deserves far more attention than it has received. The United Cajun Navy has been trying to search for Nancy Guthrie since the beginning of this investigation. They submitted a 41-page search plan to the Pima County Sheriff's Office. Dogs, aerial drones, ground teams, specialists who have found missing persons in terrain exactly like the Sonoran Desert. They have submitted that plan multiple times across 5 months, and the Pima County Sheriff's Office has never responded with permission. Brian Thrasher from the United Cajun Navy said it plainly this week. At this point, you would just be looking for remains, which would be valuable to the family to have that closure, and for some reason they just decided they were not going to take the outside help. Now sit with that for a moment. A professional volunteer search organization with real resources and real capabilities has been asking permission to help find an 84-year-old woman for 5 months. The sheriff's office has not said no. They have simply never said yes. No dialogue, no coordination, no explanation. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore said this week that Pima County was already too slow to pivot from missing person to violent crime scene in the critical first hours of February 1st. The United Cajun Navy situation suggests that same institutional slowness has continued throughout the entire investigation. Outside resources being left on the table while a family waits for answers that are not coming. Now here is where this week's coverage produced something genuinely valuable. Because buried underneath the ransom note debate and the search permission story was the most detailed and honest explanation of the DNA situation this investigation has ever produced. Dr. Hampian, one of the country's leading forensic DNA scientists who has helped crack cases that sat cold for decades, sat down with Brian Entin and explained exactly what is taking so long. And what he said surprised even Entin. The DNA has already been extracted. That part is largely done. What is taking time is not the extraction. It is the sorting. And the reason the sorting is so difficult comes down to 2 specific problems that exist simultaneously in this case. Problem 1 is the mixed sample. According to Dr. Hampian, a mixed sample means more than one person contributed biological material to the same location. 2 people is complicated. 3 or more, and he described it as a bowl of Scrabble letters. You no longer have a clear, readable profile for any individual contributor. You have overlapping fragments from multiple people all tangled together, and you have to separate each one cleanly before any of them become usable in a genealogy search. That process is painstaking and cannot be rushed without risking errors that would destroy the evidential value of the sample entirely. Problem 2 is ethnic representation in genealogy databases. Dr. Hampian explained this directly. The people who have voluntarily uploaded their DNA to ancestry platforms are overwhelmingly white Europeans. Scandinavian, British, German, those populations are extremely well represented. If the DNA recovered from Nancy's home belongs to someone from a less represented population, the genealogy search produces far fewer partial matches to work from. And the Tucson area, close to the Mexican border with a significant Hispanic population, raises the specific possibility that the suspect's ethnic background may be underrepresented in the databases currently being searched. This does not mean a dead end. It means a longer path to the same destination, because the databases grow every week. Every person who submits a DNA sample to a genealogy platform for any reason becomes a potential partial match to an unknown suspect's profile. A second cousin who uploads their DNA to research their family history next month could be the thread that connects investigators to someone who has never appeared in any criminal database. Dr. Hampian proved this is not theoretical. He described a case in Idaho where a man named Charles Fain spent 20 years on death row for a crime he did not commit. The only physical evidence was a single rootless pubic hair from the real perpetrator. For decades, the technology did not exist to extract usable genealogy information from rootless hair. Then Dr. Ed Green, the scientist who sequenced the Neanderthal genome, developed a technique that changed everything. The hair was processed. A genealogy search was run. A family member had uploaded their DNA to a public database. The real perpetrator was identified, tried, and convicted 40 years after the crime. Charles Fain was finally declared innocent and compensated. That case is not just an interesting story. It is a direct proof of concept for what investigators are attempting right now with the rootless hair found inside Nancy Guthrie's home. The technology that cracked a 40-year-old case using a single rootless hair is the same technology being applied to this evidence right now across specialist labs nationwide. Dr. Hampian believes the extraction is complete. The data exists. What investigators are waiting for is either a database hit from a relative who has not yet uploaded their DNA, or a technological advance that makes currently unusable partial data suddenly readable. And here is the detail that most people following this case have missed entirely. A database miss today is not a permanent miss. It is a temporary miss. The databases are not static. They grow continuously. A hit that does not exist today may exist next month, when someone's sibling or cousin or aunt submits a sample for a holiday gift ancestry kit without any idea their DNA is about to connect investigators to an active murder case. That is the patient reality of where the DNA investigation actually stands. Not stalled, not failed, waiting for the databases to catch up to the evidence that is already there. Okay, so let me bring the full picture together, because this week produced 3 separate developments that individually look like noise, but lined up next to each other tell a very specific story about where this investigation stands 5 months in. The Reuters report saying all notes are fake, the FBI official statement contradicting it within 24 hours. The United Cajun Navy still being denied permission to search, and a DNA situation that is not stalled but is dependent on databases that grow week by week while investigators wait for a match that may arrive tomorrow or may arrive in 3 years. None of those things point toward an investigation that is falling apart. But none of them point toward an investigation that is days away from an arrest either. What they point toward is an investigation running on patience and forensic methodology in a case where the early hours were not handled as aggressively as they should have been, and where the consequences of that are still being felt 5 months later. Now here is where Mark Geragos enters the picture again, because he has now raised the same idea twice publicly on News Nation, and Brian Entin is taking it seriously enough to build a future episode around it. The idea is simple. If someone out there knows what happened to Nancy Guthrie and is not the person directly responsible for taking her, that person can get a lawyer. That lawyer can contact prosecutors, and a deal can be worked out that provides protection, potentially immunity, or significantly reduced exposure, in exchange for real information that advances the investigation. Geragos was specific about what that looks like in practice. A reverse proffer. A structured conversation between a lawyer representing an informant and federal prosecutors where the informant's information is evaluated for its value before any formal commitment is made. This is not a handshake agreement. It is a legal process with protections built in for both sides. And it has produced breakthroughs in cases far more complex than this one. Now I want you to think about who Geragos is actually talking to when he puts that idea on the table publicly. Not the masked figure on that doorbell camera, not the main person directly responsible. He is talking to someone on the periphery. Someone who was told what happened. Someone who has been watching this investigation for 5 months, watching the DNA labs work, watching the genealogy databases being searched, watching the FBI issue public statements, and understanding that the window for coming forward on favorable terms is not infinite. Because here is the mathematical reality of this situation. The longer someone with information waits, the less leverage they have. Right now, a genuine informant with real information about what happened to Nancy Guthrie has something investigators want badly enough to offer meaningful terms for. The moment the DNA produces a name, the moment the genealogy work reaches its conclusion, that leverage evaporates entirely. There is no deal to be made once investigators already have the answer. There is only prosecution. Dr. Hampian said something in his conversation with Brian Entin that connects directly to this. He said whoever walked through that house left DNA. He is confident of that. The question is not whether the biological evidence exists. It is whether the databases have caught up enough to read it. And databases do not announce when they are about to produce a hit. They just do it. One day there is no match. The next day, a relative uploads their sample, and suddenly investigators have a thread that leads to a name. For someone sitting on information right now, that gap between today and the day the database produces a hit is the only window they have, and that window is closing on a timeline nobody outside the investigation can see. Now let me address the United Cajun Navy situation directly. Because the sheriff's failure to respond to a 41-page professional search plan submitted multiple times over 5 months is not a minor administrative oversight. Brian Thrasher said it himself. At this point, you would just be looking for remains, which would be valuable to the family for closure. Nancy's family has been waiting 5 months for the kind of closure that comes from knowing where she is. A professional volunteer organization with dogs, drones, and ground teams has been offering to help provide that closure for 5 months, and the Pima County Sheriff's Office has never given them a yes. In a case where Steve Moore already believes the initial crime scene response was too slow to pivot from missing person to violent crime, the continued pattern of declining outside resources raises questions about institutional decision-making that nobody in an official capacity has been willing to answer publicly. Now here is where everything this week lands when you stack it together. The ransom notes are still potentially legitimate according to FBI Phoenix, despite what Reuters reported. The internal disagreement that produced two contradictory public narratives in the same week tells you the investigation is not running as a unified, coherent operation with everyone on the same page. The DNA is not stalled but is waiting on databases and a rootless hair technology that has cracked cases before and will crack this one if the right family connection surfaces. The United Cajun Navy is ready to search and has been ready for 5 months. And a pathway exists right now through a lawyer and a deal for someone carrying information they were never built to carry indefinitely. 5 months, no arrest, no named suspect, no public explanation for what happened on the night of February 1st in a house in the Catalina foothills where an 84-year-old woman's blood was found on the porch while her phone, her wallet, her medication, and her hearing aids sat exactly where she left them. Nancy Guthrie went to Mass every Sunday morning. She called her daughter every single day without missing a beat. She had dinner with her family the night she was taken and let someone she loved walk her to her door. The databases are being searched. The labs are working. The genealogy thread is live. And somewhere out there, a person who knows what happened is doing the same calculation they have been doing every morning for 5 months, weighing what they know against what comes next. If you have made it this far, do not forget to subscribe so you can stay updated as this case develops. Something is moving. I will talk to you very soon.